السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب ولا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. In this holy month of Ramadan, we are reflecting on certain verses of the Quran that help not only Muslim but all humanity to develop a strong moral character for a better individual, for a better society, and for a better world. And we have lined up a team of scholars, activists, and laypersons to reflect on certain verses of the Quran and tell us how they help us as human beings improve our own living conditions and our own society and community. We believe that the truth is in the Quran. We believe that God has given us that book. And we believe that the purpose of giving us that book is not to have an arrogance or not to have a sense of superiority, but to have a sense of responsibility towards ourselves and towards society as a whole. It is in that spirit we are focusing on the Quranic verses. With us is Sister Samia Bano, who is a psychologist, who is an author of a book that talks about change in one's life, who herself has gone through transformation in her life despite the hurdles that she faced. And she is not only an author, but also an advocate of happiness. She also teaches the psychology of happiness, and she is involved in a lot of community work. With that, I invite Sister Samia once again to share her reflections on the verses that she has for today. Welcome, Sister Samia.
Thank you, Dr. Aslam. So today, I want to continue reflecting on the theme of charity or giving, and there's three other verses that I picked to talk about. And one way, actually, maybe four, but one way that these verses are all tied together is that they all talk about what I think of as sort of the etiquette of giving. So it's like when we are giving charity, what and how do we do it in terms of etiquette of it. So let me just quickly, I guess, read the three verses. There are just three verses. And then I'll jump into reflections on them because they're all connected to each other. So the first one is from chapter 17, verse 29. And it says, "And let not your hand be tied like a miser to your neck, nor stretch it forth to its utmost reach like a spendthrift, so that you become blameworthy or in severe poverty." Then the next verse is, "And unto such of the needy, who being wholly wrapped up in God's cause, are unable to go about the earth in search of livelihood." So in other words, give to such needy people who, being wholly wrapped up in God's cause, are not able to go about the earth in search of livelihood. He who is unaware of their condition might think that they are wealthy because of their restraint, but you will know them by their characteristic sign. They do not ask people persistently or at all, and whatever good you may spend, verily God knows it all. This was from chapter 2, verse 273. And the third verse is actually just very short, and it's referring to Prophet Abraham or Prophet Ibrahim when he was visited by the angels. So they appeared to him in the form of human strangers, and when they came to him, he saw them, and then this verse refers to what he did. So the verse the verse just says, then he went to his family and bought a fat roasted calf. That was from chapter 51:26. So this is basically, again, Prophet Abraham had two angels appear to him as human beings, as strangers at his tent. He invited them in. Then he went to his family and brought a fat roasted calf for them to eat. All right, so some very important things in these verses that we are learning about how to engage in giving. I'll start with the simplest verse that I just quoted last about the Prophet Abraham. So here were these complete strangers, as far as he knew, who just popped in on his tent, and he invites them in, and he goes to his family and brings out a fat roasted calf. So it says to me, the lesson here is, number one, if you have guests, even if they're strangers and you don't know who they are, you still need to treat them in a respectful and honorable way. And you need to give them of the good things that you have. That's why he didn't just bring them any old thing to eat. He brought them a fat roasted calf. And not only did he give of his good, something that was good, that belonged to him, but he gave even without being asked. Like they didn't have to be like, oh, we're hungry, can you give us food? He anticipated their need, and he gave without asking, and he gave of his good things. So this is one of the etiquettes of giving. The next verse, which was the first one I quoted, which talked about, and let not your hand be tied like a miser to your neck, nor stretch it forth to its utmost, like a spendthrift, so that you become blameworthy or in severe poverty. And with this verse, I mean, very clearly, it's teaching us the value of striking a balance between how much we give. Like you don't not want to give or give too little, but you also don't want to give so much that you end up in severe poverty yourself. Very valuable lesson in its way, but it did make me think of a question that I would love Dr. Aslam to reflect on and give me some feedback. And the question is, well, how do you actually judge how much is too much? Because for me, it's easy to see when I'm not giving enough, when I can be more generous. But it's harder for me to understand sometimes or judge how much might be too much giving. Because when I think about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and I think about how much the Prophet, peace be upon him, gave, I feel very inadequate in my giving. I mean, we have stories of the Prophet, wearing patched clothes, sleeping on a mat that left marks on his cheek, of not having anything more than a few dates to eat because he gave away everything else to other people in the community who were in need, and so forth. And, by our modern American standards, certainly that I am living by, like he went, it might look like he went way too far. Like he was living in poverty, uh, uh, at least if you just look at the surface of things, I suppose. So, how do we determine how much is too much? So that's a question. And then the third verse um, also raised a lot of questions actually for me. And this is the one that talks about giving to people who don't ask themselves, who might not ask you themselves because that's part of their character, um, but they're in need, and these are people who are wholly wrapped up in God's cause. And because they're wholly wrapped up in God's cause, they're not able to go out and do other work, or do work in search of livelihood and so forth. And so here God is saying, look, find these people. It's important that you don't just assume that they're fine, that they're okay, that you need to think for yourself. Look at how people are acting in their lives, how they're devoting their lives to God's cause and so forth, and think about, hey, how are these people meeting their needs? Are they able to meet their needs? They might not be able to actually meet their needs because they're so busy doing God's work. So let me give to them. This is clearly another very clear etiquette or aspect of how we're supposed to engage in doing charity. But also, this raises questions for me in terms of like these people not asking, and what does I am a psychologist at heart, so I have to think about their psychology. It's like, why are they not asking? Is there something wrong with asking? Um, is there something about the way that you ask? Because in some of the translations, it says that they don't ask, in the sense that they don't beg. So is it that they just don't beg? So it's okay to ask for help, but there's something different about begging, and what you're not supposed to do is beg, but it's okay to ask for help. And so, like, to think about what's the difference between asking for help versus begging, and and under what conditions it might be acceptable to ask for help or beg or not. So those are just some more questions that I had, and I will ask Dr. Aslam to please give me his feedback on that.
Thank you very much for explaining further this concept of giving and charity. And it's not only money that we give, it's a smile that we give, it's the happiness that we give to others. It's everything that is part of life that enable other person to feel confident, to feel comfortable in our presence and with his life or her life. That basically all is included in this charity and giving and the concept of spending. What is being said is that keep your resources open so that if anyone else is in need, you can offer it to him. You raised a few important issues. How much should we give, and what is the limit? The Quran, in that respect, give this kind of autonomy to each individual to decide and determine sincerely what is beyond their needs. The Quran, there is a verse in the Quran which says that they ask, "What should we spend?" Tell them that they should spend what is more than their needs. So we must make a distinction between our wants and our needs. We want to have everything in the world. We want to have airplane. We want to have entire world, entire country, owned by us. But this is not what our needs are. So we have to determine based on our own way of life, determine based on our own style, and decide it sincerely. And then see if we have things that are beyond our needs, then we should be prepared to spend. That's one thing that the Quran is saying. And who would make the decision? We. Why would we make that decision? Because it is our intention and it is our action that counts in the eyes of God. It is not what we pretend and what we show off. It is what our intention is and how that intention is substantiated with our action that counts. So, for instance, today, I have $100, and my need for today is $50. I have $50 left. I'm thinking of tomorrow also, and I'm thinking that probably I should save some money for tomorrow because I don't know if I would be able to work tomorrow, if I would be able to have, even though I have full trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's still to be precautious. As Yusuf alayhi salam was precautious when he asked the Egyptians to save for 7 years, for the time when they have this kind of famine, even though he knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. So I say, and then I see, can I spend that 25, the remaining ones, to those who are in need? And then definitely that is my choice. And definitely that is an action that would be counted, but it has to be based on my sincere thinking, my sincere feelings. It is a decision that I would make it myself. The same way as during the fasting, for instance. If I decide not to fast based on my physical conditions, I'm the only one who can make that decision. No doctor, no scholar, no learned person can make that decision for me. I have to be answerable and accountable for my action. And if my action is based on sincerity, and if I believe I cannot fast on that particular day because of my physical conditions, because of whatever problems I am having, then I am basically having a justification in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for my action, and it is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept or reject. But He knows that my decision was based on my pure intentions, not on the basis of my weakness, not on the basis of my manipulation of the rule. That is what the essence is, that I should not manipulate rules. I should not manipulate guidance in order to suit my interest. And that is a decision that each individual has to take oneself. Each family has to take oneself. Each community has to take oneself. So that's one thing. Second thing, you asked about the begging and asking. What is being said is that we should not nag people with what we are looking for. That's one thing. And then secondly, it is also asking the community to develop a mechanism where it keeps a record of those people who are in that kind of situation. I mean, if we truly follow the zakat system that we have, then probably in a cycle of 10 years, you can turn over the community, from dependent to independent, because those people who are receiving zakat today would become the people who would be able to give zakat in the next 5, 10 years if the zakat money is properly used and if the resources are properly spent by the community. So what basically is required is that the people should keep, the community as a whole should have a mechanism, an organization, a systematic method to basically have a survey of the people living in that area and that vicinity. In Medina, at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the community was small, and They used to keep a census and they used to keep a record of the people living in Medina, and they used to basically have an idea of how and what their physical and social and financial conditions are. So even without asking, the Prophet would make sure that these people are helped from the Bethel Mal and from other places. And then the tribals who would come from outside, they would basically ask, and some of them were basically constantly nagging, even though they knew that the condition, the Prophet was not as such that he would be able to give them at that particular time, but they would nag. So it is in that particular context that we should look at what is being said. So telling people of what their condition is not wrong, because after all, even in survey, you tell people that this is what our conditions is. It's up to the community to develop and determine that kind of mechanism. So it is in that particular context. Unfortunately, we have not developed that system as yet, despite the fact that we have the resources, we have the mechanism, we have the people who are willing to spend, we have all those kind of things. So it is in that particular context that we should look at it, and hopefully that basically responds to some of your questions. And I think we are exceeding our time limit, and thank you very much for once again making the presentation, and we would be back tomorrow also to conclude our discussion with you on the verses of the Quran that help us develop a strong moral character. Would you like to add anything in conclusion, or should we conclude it?
We can conclude. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much.